Tēnā koutou katoa, nā mai, haere mai. Welcome everyone from the far north to the far south. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Eve Price from Concove Tuhura, and it's my pleasure to host today's kōrero on a topic that's quickly gaining traction across the vocational and tertiary education landscape, degree-level apprenticeships, from research to reality. At Concove, our mission is to connect industry and education, finding practical, evidence-based ways to lift performance, equity, and learner success across Aotearoa's construction and infrastructure sectors. The degree-level apprenticeship project has been underway for the past 3 years, exploring how Aotearoa can integrate degree study with structured paid employment. It's an ambitious piece of work, one that asks how we can take the best elements of both systems and build a model that delivers high-value skills for learners and employers alike. What's exciting is that this work is now gaining real momentum. We're seeing interest from university groups who recognise the potential of this model, and there's growing alignment from government, with ministers signalling that degree apprenticeships are a national priority for the years ahead. Today's session will unpack what this means in practice, what this model could look like here, how it can help address skills shortages, widen access to higher education, and create stronger pathways between learning and work. You'll hear insights from the team behind this mahi, the research that defined the enabling framework, pilot experiences from industry, and the new implementation guides that are now available for employers, learners, and tertiary providers. As usual, we'll wrap up with a short Q&A, so please feel free to drop your questions into the chat as we go. A recording will also be available after the session. But firstly, it's my pleasure to introduce our panellists. Brendan Mashewski, who led the work behind this project, Karen Davis from ADNZ, who's representing the Industry Association perspective, and Tai Tuahi from Stevenson Tuahi, bringing the voice of employers and the on-ground experience. Let's get started. Brendan, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Eve. So, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Brendan Mashewski tōku ingoa, no porirua hou, kei Mashewski Consulting in mahi ana, but as the joke goes, that changes every couple of hours. I've been involved with this work for the last 2 years, working with wonderful people like Kieran and Ty, and I think about between 30 and 50 others involved in the implementation group. So a fantastic group of people, and lovely to talk to you all today.
Thank you. Karen.
Tēnā tātou katoa, malo. My name's Kieran Davis. I'm CEO of Architectural Designers New Zealand. We are the professional body for architectural designers and architects in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and we have over 900 members. So it's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much, Karen. Tai.
Talofa lava. My name's Tai Tuahi from Dunedin, and my involvement began about 3 years ago when Karen sent me along to find out what Concove is all about, and here we are hours and hours and years later.
Indeed.
Yeah, thanks for them being involved, yeah.
Thank you. Brendan, can we start at the beginning, please? Could you explain what degree-level apprenticeships are and what problems they're designed to solve?
Sure, thanks, Eve. So degree apprenticeships combine paid employment with degree study. So they're an earn-as-you-learn pathway. Apprentices are employees first who earn a salary while completing a recognised bachelor's or postgraduate degree, with most of the learning planned, supervised, assessed and credentialed in the workplace. Degree apprenticeships tackle 4 big system problems. First of all, it can often take too long for graduates to be productive. As one learner put it in one of our surveys, I learnt more in a week on the job than a year in the classroom. Many employers talk about needing to retrain graduates to be fully effective when they take them on. The way degree apprenticeships deals with this is by using learning and assessment based on real work with a backstop, a really important backstop from universities, polytechs, wānanga and PTEs that provide that theoretical backbone and the breadth of experience that we expect of graduates. The second thing is that we often exclude too many people from degree study. So if you don't embark on an undergraduate degree by the time you're in your mid-20s, then your chance of doing so drops precipitously. Degree apprenticeships mean that the system can cater better to older learners by creating opportunities for them to be in work while pursuing advanced programs, and creating opportunities for people, particularly those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who might be deterred by that opportunity cost of studying. The third opportunity is that our tertiary education system isn't as resilient as it needs to be. So providers generally specialise in on-campus learning that's, as we know, more buoyant when the economy struggles, or, on the other hand, work-based learning, which is more buoyant during periods of higher employment. Providers that offer degree apprenticeships can flex with the economic cycle, supporting upskilling in booms and retraining in downturns. And then fourth and finally, there's the need to make more effective use of scarce public funding. So degree apprenticeships involve less call on student loans and allowances, which our estimates show saves the government about $20,000 for a 4-year degree. And that's not even counting the economic value that comes from having more people in paid employment. What we're doing essentially is using the same fundamental infrastructure that you see in New Zealand's apprenticeship and industry training system, that tripartite partnership between employers, apprentices and providers, the role of the workplace as the primary place where learning happens, and regular comprehensive engagement and assessment to support the learner. That system currently supports over 100,000 employees to earn and learn. But what we're talking about here is making a meaningful leap in our ambition. So we're bringing that proven model into degrees, into a wider range of areas and at scale.
Thanks, Brendan. What we're talking about here is perhaps less of a degree that leads to a job, but a job that leads to a degree.
Exactly.
Karen, from ADNZ's perspective, how does this resonate with industry?
Well, it resonates really, really strongly. I mean, many of the things that Brendan said is exactly the reason why we got involved. I think we were surprised at how enthusiastic our members were, particularly as employers. They all, or many said that if they'd had this opportunity, they would have taken it themselves. So they see huge opportunity there, and certainly they were motivated to be involved for all of the reasons that Brendan's described. For many of our members, they report that the traditional classroom environment didn't really serve them so well. And what we know in the industry, in architecture in particular, that we're missing out on a really diverse talent pool. Currently, the system is not serving all learners well and not necessarily serving all employers well either. So we expect that this program or this approach will really help with that really strong applied practical real world setting experience, which many of our employers say graduates are missing. And as you said before, the speed in bringing them up to speed, really the strongest place that happens is in practice and studio. And that concern with debt and the financial burden is real. Many of our young people in particular don't want to be burdened by that financial debt well into their 40s, which they will be. Or if you're switching industries later on in life, then, taking on study feels like such a burden. So we believe that this balances all of those things out. So we're excited by that innovation.
Yeah, the opportunities for retraining, upskilling, reskilling are huge with this. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Ty, as an employer, what interested you in being involved in the pilot project?
I saw a really great opportunity to get involved to bring a Pacific Island perspective, but also it did, lean itself towards Pacific Island Māori people, especially. There could be like Kieran and Brendan mentioned about the deterrent of going to tertiary education after high school. And this would really, give them an opportunity to go into a workplace and excel in an area where they may not have necessarily seen themselves. I do see Pacific Island Māori people as very talented and creative people, and that there's a lot of pressure from family and culture within high school students when they get to finish to go into paid employment straight away. So this sort of ticks both boxes for that area, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Brendan, what makes New Zealand's context unique for this approach?
Well, I think there's 3 things I'd like to point to. Besides that deep bench of experience with work-based learning that I talked about earlier, one of the things I hear a lot about is about the composition of the economy. So people are often saying we have so many SMEs in this country, how could this model possibly work? Well, I think something like half of all of our employment sits with just 2,200 larger businesses. So they do provide some major anchors for providers that are prepared to work in that space. So you think about Health New Zealand, New Zealand Police, a number of employers at the heart of large and complex supply chains. But success here obviously also means designing for SMEs. So it's not relying on, as perhaps you might see overseas, a few giants like the big defence primes or large technology firms. You really do have to start with building a system around the needs of those small and medium-sized enterprises. And our guidelines are pointing to ways in which employers and providers can organise around that goal. The second is the role of Te Tiriti. So the partnership between iwi Māori and the Crown really should guide and strengthen these models, shaping how we approach governance, delivery, and outcomes that honour Māori aspirations. We've shared as part of the resources we published today some very valuable work that Food and Fibre commissioned from HTA Group in Aotearoa around kaupapa Māori delivery models and pointed to ways in which employers and providers can bring this partnership thinking to life in our resources. The third thing I think is that our small size can be a feature rather than a bug. So New Zealand's repeatedly scaled national training reforms quickly, whether it's that growth in industry training starting in the 1990s or the massification we've seen in tertiary education. The kind of changes we need to see here to activate that revolution are what we've focused on in the enabling framework, which we'll talk about. What we really are doing here is trying to promote what I'd call a third revolution, integrating the world of the academy with that of industry. And, as in New Zealand, we've got this track record of turning on a dime when we need to deliver these kind of changes.
Thank you. Karen, you've been involved since very early on in this pilot work. What inspired you to take part, and what potential did you see in this model for your team?
Yeah, well, look, we had identified the issue that not all of the current models were serving all learners or employers. We've identified that some time ago. So we were really interested in greater choice and innovation to help solve what we know is actually a well-recognised issue of inequitable outcomes and lack of diversity in the sector. So we know that Māori, Pacific peoples, women are all underrepresented in our profession. So we've got to try something new. We've got to do something different to start addressing that issue and for the reasons that Tai, you've expressed just before. So the other thing was we were really interested in co-designing from the get-go. Yes. So that was absolutely something we wanted to do. If we identified the issue, then we want to be part of that solution. So we really valued that very, very highly. It's an effective design principle in our book, so that was always going to be really attractive to us. So designing right from the get-go, that co-design. But we knew that there was real interest from our employer members. So this was not something that, in the beginning I was kind of unsure, would people really want this? So they did, and they do. So what we're interested in is how can they be really willing and able to, how can we help employers from day one, really, if this was to get off the ground, how we're going to do that, and we want to be part of that solution. So I think if we've got employers ready, and if we're a good professional home for our employers and our learners, then I think we've got an important role to play in that. So we could only see positives.
Absolutely, thank you. And it was great then that translated into the interest from the actual employers. And Tai, from your perspective as an employer, what do you see the benefits of degree level apprenticeships being?
I think, like has already been said, about the acceleration of learning within the workplace, just with hands-on experience. I find that when I do take on a student or somebody who may not be a student but wanting work experiences, they pick things up pretty quickly, especially younger participants. And when that happens, it's literally within 1 to 2 weeks where I can start to actually think, well, the work they're doing is actually quite valuable, and it might even be worth, paying a person to do these tasks, which we can teach them hand-on experience. Quite often, students that go and do full tertiary education spend time at the polytechs or the universities doing broad brush approach to learning, which is great, rather than the technical aspects of the job, which might be specific to, say, an area of the country that you're in where the architecture may not be the same as what they're teaching in universities or polytechs. And so when a student is looking for a job or wants to potentially work in a particular area, they can actually, if they're going for a degree level apprenticeship, they could actually focus on going to a practice that offers them the experience that they're after. And also it gives the flexibility of them being able to do that rather than being confined to what the universities or the polytechs may teach. Not to say that that doesn't have its place. It's just an alternative for people wanting to do something different.
Thank you. Brendan, we'll talk about the guides now for a little bit. Can you tell us that in the guides that we've produced, how do they support industry and employers, and in particular that really strong small and medium population that we have in New Zealand?
Thanks, Eve. So, when we think about how to support industry and employers, especially small and medium-sized businesses, our purpose through those guidelines has really been to highlight options rather than try and prescribe a single way of doing things. We know that many SMEs see the potential of degree apprenticeships, and the comments from Ty and Kieran today are testament to that. But tertiary education generally, and this model in particular, can perhaps feel a bit complex. So our focus has been on helping them understand the range of choices available to them and how they might perhaps start small, share responsibility with others and gradually build their own confidence. Some of the most promising options for small employers, might include things like shared or clustered apprenticeship models, where 2 or more businesses are collaborating to give apprentices that full range of experience they need. When you think about the differences, say, between in the architectural design context between commercial and residential, without each firm having to provide every learning opportunity on its own. And providers and even industry associations can help broker those rotations, coordinate supervision, and reduce administrative pressure for everyone involved, particularly SMEs, and help them, those businesses, participate on an equal footing with larger firms. We've also advised employers to look carefully at whether the roles they're trying to fill generally require degree level learning. So degrees are not the solution, we know, for everything, but where the need is clear, perhaps you've got some complex project management or design roles where theory and practice have to come together, they might be the ideal solution. But for others, of course, it might be better to focus on more traditional forms of apprenticeship and trades training or diplomas or micro-credentials. The goal really for the employers is making informed, sustainable choices for their own businesses, not us trying to impose a one-size-fits-all approach. A consistent theme across all 3 of the guides is the importance of co-design. So for employers, they're able to be involved, as they wish in shaping curriculum, supervision and assessment. And what we're suggesting is they explore that spectrum with providers and find the right level of engagement that fits their own size and capability. We've also encouraged providers to make it easier for small employers to participate by providing clear templates, supervisor training, and those regular 3-way reviews. This tripartite model, where apprentice, employer, and provider all share some responsibility, will give SMEs a real structure and reassurance that they're not on their own in this journey. And finally, we've also promoted some simple ways to track value using metrics like time to competence, retention, and the ability to take on new types of work. A lot of evidence from the UK and other jurisdictions about the real benefits for businesses, but obviously having a way to track that evidence yourself, as a way as an employer for you to justify your ongoing involvement. So advice, I guess, to industry in a nutshell has been to start where you are, use the partnerships and tools that are already there, and focus on making learning in your workplace count. We know the degree apprenticeship model isn't the only solution, but we really do think it's one of the most promising ways to grow capability while keeping people employed and businesses productive.
And this actually answers one of the questions that we had already around the scope of work that an employer needs to support the learner and what happens if an employer doesn't have that scope. So I think we've addressed that already. Thank you. Ty and Karen, you've been part of this journey as employers and industry. What have you seen firsthand about how this adds value to the workplace? Ty, perhaps you'd like to comment on that?
Yeah, we've had many students, high school or tertiary education students come through our workplace, so we have a little bit of experience in terms of what's expected, that the level of skill that they have. We also within our working group had Cameron Grinley and Ruben Munro, who both are ADNZ members as well, both of which who have Cameron's got vast knowledge about students. He's had many apprentices or people doing work experience through his practice, and a lot of his passions were around getting these students to a level of usefulness within his practice. So he's very, very passionate about this topic in particular, and his input was very valuable. Ruben also brought a great first-hand experience from his, I think he was with Open Polytech, and he had a lot of great insights in terms of how the apprenticeship model could work. I think all three of us being so passionate about the program brought a good sort of understanding of the importance of getting these students to a useful level rather than them coming out of tertiary and being at a level which sometimes may seem like you have to undo certain habits and things like that. Yeah.
Karen, how about from your members' perspective?
Well, I think to echo what Ty said, this is a two-way street. It's not just about the learners learning from the employers, but the employers are gaining so much from the learners as well, and the perspectives that they bring, and the talents and skill sets. No matter if they're a young person or this is their second or third career, this is a two-way street. So I think our members could see huge value in that immersive, studio-based approach to training, but that they were excited about the value they could add to that. And so this was a positive on both sides. There's as much to learn as to gain. And I think from us as a professional body, we're a community of practice already. So we know that we can pull people together and support the approaches that Brendan's talked to, where the community of practice wraps around the apprentices, the students, that is particularly as small business owners or small to medium business owners, that there's the ability to pull that talent. We're a key conduit for that, and we can immerse them in a community, not only in the practice that they might be in, the studio that they're working in, but as a community wrap round. So we're able to be their home from the get-go, and provide them that peer support and a network of people around them, learners and other employers.
I just jump in there and just say that I was studying years and years ago, so I like to think my knowledge of the technology that's out there now is up there, but probably not. And I have first-hand experience of students coming into our workplace and bringing a fresh eye of technological advances in architecture, and that space is moving so quickly it's hard for us to keep up. So when these younger, fresher eyes come into our workplace and they're like, we use this program, or, we can do this in this way, it's really beneficial for us too. So there's lots of value there as an employer as well.
And I think that's a really strong point to make, that we often talk about what the industry provides the learner, but actually it's also what the learner provides back to industry, in particular employers. So let's focus on the learner for a little bit. How are we ensuring that learners are supported to succeed?
Thanks, Eve. So, when we think about supporting learners, we've very much been inspired by the Learner Success Framework the TEC's led, and building on that to help everyone involved, whether it's providers, employers and learners themselves, to understand what good support can look like. So we've focused on, in our guidelines, some options and approaches that can help learners succeed, whether they're entering the workforce for the first time or perhaps they're already employed and looking to upskill. So the starting point really has been about clarity. So we've encouraged learners to use simple checklists to help them decide whether a degree apprenticeship's right for them, to think carefully about how it fits with their career aspirations, to understand the support networks that they'll need and how they'll balance work, study and life commitments. We've done that by giving them some simple questions to ask in job interviews or selection processes, really about gauging, let's be honest, if the employer and the provider have thought through everything that's required. It's really about making sure learners make informed choices. And throughout the guidelines, though, we've emphasised that learners aren't on their own because the learner, is both a student and an employee. We've provided guidance about how they can map their support system, who to go for academic help, who to talk to in the workplace, who they can access for pastoral and wellbeing support, and how all those roles can fit together. And a big part of our advice has been around protected study time. So for many people, trying to juggle work and study is really a make or break factor in terms of learner success. So we've encouraged employers to make sure they roster study time within paid hours, and for learners to really treat this as seriously as any client meeting or worksite briefing. So the way we're supporting learners, proposing learners are supported, isn't through a single service, it's through that network of people, systems and conversations that put success at their centre. And it's really about making sure every learner has the structure and the flexibility and the confidence they need to earn, learn and thrive in these programs.
Yeah, thank you. Let's talk about the relationship between the providers and the professional bodies, because that's significantly different in this instance. So Karen and Ty, how does this relationship differ in this model versus how you have traditionally worked in this space?
Well, I think firstly, we've got some really fantastic relationships in place already. And I think in the pilot, that certainly showed its incredible value, that we had an existing relationship with our provider, and so it was an easy step to start exploring some of these things together. But I think in the future, I think there's the untapped potential really here. We as a professional body could be helping to broker the relationships. We're the supportive champion on the side, if you like. We're also able to help validate the competencies in an ongoing way, and we can shape those over time. So we can offer a wider viewpoint, and I think this is true of any professional body. So I think we can help grow awareness, and we can spread the good word. And I think we will essentially in the future be a conduit between all the parties. As I said before, we're a professional home for both the student and the employer, and that creates a really exciting opportunity to support with recruitment, with pastoral support even as well, perhaps for our employers more so than the students perhaps, but we have an important part to play there. We're also a professional learning provider, so there's an opportunity for us to support our employers. But of course, I think there's huge untapped potential, and I think that co-design process and getting around that together is where professional bodies like us can play a really important role and should be seen as part of the mix here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Ty, anything to add?
I guess the relationship between the provider and the employer is always important. This model, I guess, allows for a more collaborative sort of engagement, and I still think that we discussed, Brendan, that the idea of potentially having a foundational course, even if it was 1 year, that goes in line with the degree level apprenticeship, not just to help the learners understand the industry, but just can act sometimes as a filter. I know from personal experience that a lot of people go into tertiary education thinking that it's their thing, and within a year they're gone. And for employers, I think that's a really good component to have as the provider gets to provide a bit of a filter for the employers, so that when the employers take on a student or an apprentice, that they hit the ground running. Getting some of those fundamental technological skills as well, it can be really helpful. Even just some of the terminology that's learnt in the first year can be really helpful for employers as well when they're trying to explain things.
And I think really valuable when we consider the potential different audiences, very different if it's a school leaver versus someone in their 30s or 40s who's already had a career and a retraining to something else. Brendan, what would you say the relationships might look like between providers and employers and industry as well?
I mean, I think we've had real life experience of this, through the implementation pilot. So one of the things, the real pleasures actually of being involved in this work is, meeting regularly with Ty and Cameron and Ruben and all the other members of from industry of the implementation groups, and really hearing from them actually what are the practical problems that we need providers to be solving, and then equally impressed by how providers have responded to that feedback from the professions, if you like, in terms of I think taking up that challenge of how do I design a model that's flexible enough to accommodate to all the different needs of learners. And so, bringing professional bodies and industry associations into this space in the way we've done, I think has been really powerful and effective. And I'd like to think that, our ability to convene those groups and then share practice across them has actually been powerful in terms of influencing the approach. We know currently professional bodies and industry associations, they tend to be downstream of degree provision, so they're focusing in the main on how to support those new graduates to join that community of professionals and obtain professional and other recognition. And sure, they play a role in accrediting degrees, but that often plays a different, creates different kinds of relationships than we probably need to see for degree apprenticeships to be a success. And so we've argued in the enabling framework in particular, and with practical examples in the other guides, that professional bodies and industry associations need to be seen as both connectors, as Kieran was talking about, but also explicitly defining those competency frameworks beyond the graduate profile outcomes, so that we're really deeply and thoughtfully integrating academic and applied learning through the undergraduate experience. And sometimes that can look like the model Ty was referring to just before, and sometimes it can be expressed in other ways. And then actively promoting and endorsing work-based learning pathways as credible routes to registration. I think we perhaps underestimate the shaping role that professional bodies and industry associations can have. And then, as Kieran was talking about, that coordination of supervision and rotation and supporting those cluster models of multiple employers, and really, potentially acting as that glue that holds all of those collaborative arrangements together, because we know, often no single firm can do it all alone, or many providers will lack those networks and relationships they need to make this a success. There's still constraints, let's be open about that, around policy settings, funding models, and in some cases, legacy relationships between providers and professional bodies that sometimes could make things, make change slower than it needs to be. But I think we've demonstrated through this work, the appetite's there, and we're really seeing a growing recognition that professional credibility and educational innovation don't have to be in tension, they can actually be self-reinforcing.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to our Q&A session now. Thank you very much to our participants who have already sent through some questions. If you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat, and we will use the next 20-25 minutes to answer as many as we can. Rapid fire round. So let's start at the top. John is asking, does the learner need a job before they start studying? Brendan, would you like to address that one?
Yeah, I mean, in principle, for a degree apprenticeship to be a degree apprenticeship, the person needs to be an employee. We do see, and we've suggested some models around admission and recruitment in both the employer and provider guide that talk about how the provider and the employers can work together to coordinate that recruitment, to how do you align both that decision to put people into employment and that decision to admit them to a qualification. But in order for the workplace to be the primary site of learning, they need to be in employment.
Yeah, thank you. Brendan asks a question about assessment. Does the assessment model adopt a practical methodology minimising documentation requirements, and I hear you on that one, that might otherwise present a significant barrier?
Shall I speak to
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. Certainly that has been a very important theme in our discussions with providers at part of the pilot groups is, how do you minimise that administrative burden for employers? And so they have all been thinking about practical strategies to do that. We do have a very whilst there is some variability in that system, in apprenticeship and industry training already, some very effective streamlined models that we would expect people to draw upon for sure.
There's a couple of questions here in a similar vein around the sort of the sharing of of learners or employees across different employers. Does the learner sign up for one company and then they swap between others to get that coverage and scope? And do agreements with the primary employer need to be altered? And I think that's probably a good question for all three of you, because you might have slightly different perspectives on the same topic.
Yeah, we certainly discussed that during our working group, and there are certainly opportunities there for that to be a part of the model. That there could be, I mean, we talked about ADNZ being a facilitator or a provider, and as part of ADNZ, who has a vast array of employers within their membership, is that, maybe there's an opportunity for the provider to take them on and spread them around, and people or our members or employers that have certain areas of expertise. A lot of ADNZ members will specialise in certain areas but want to be involved. So they can't technically give them all the experience, but can potentially provide them with one aspect of the qual that they may need, and then be perfectly happy to send them into somewhere else. That also develops probably more of a well-rounded apprentice, I find. If you are going to lots of different workplaces, A, you get to see how different employers work, and B, you get a variety of different projects to work on, plus there's potentially different technological advances within each practice that you can try out as well. And if you get that wealth of experience when you come out, you potentially are then more employable to anybody, or to even stay with the person that's providing you with the apprenticeship. Yeah, ideally the apprentice would stay with you, as most employers would probably argue. Yeah.
But I think, just to add to that, I think what we're hearing is some flex, and we're looking for a system that will accommodate the needs of learners and employers. So it will need to be flexible enough, or we will need to problem solve those things together. So what better way to do that than to collaborate across the network, particularly when we're some of those learners and employers might be in geographically isolated regions, and the huge potential that we have for a countrywide network and beyond just means that, gosh, if we could use that network in a networked approach in this way, gosh, we could do so much more, couldn't we, than we could on our own. So I think that's the potential here, and that's what we're looking for.
To give you some perspective, like within our ADNZ group itself, we've had our own experience in Dunedin with, some employers who have said, we're running out of work, have you got any work, or do you want to take on somebody? And we've literally been able to shift them into a place, or, somebody might be overloaded, and so they then take on work from other people. So the workload's already being shared, it's just in a different way. Yeah.
And certainly, I mean, there are models that, we'll all be familiar with, like group employment schemes that allow, a framework. I think the question's, partly asking about how do you make sure that employment relationship and agreement reflects what's going on. So that's a way into it. But also in a practical sense, when we're talking about some provider-based training where you will have, perhaps a Bachelor of Nursing students who are doing clinical placements in lots of different settings through the course of their qualification. So this is not an unfamiliar, I think, space for many people.
And I think that's an important point to make as well, is while obviously we're focusing on the architectural world at the moment, the model that has been developed for you guys might not necessarily be the model for another industry. Even if we're talking about the same provider, the first degree level apprenticeship for one industry might look completely different to the second one that the same provider develops for a different industry as well. We have a question around duration, and I think it's a really good one. Would you expect a DLA to take a similar duration to a traditional degree completed as a full-time student?
Look, I think our starting point is that, they ought to be able to get through these qualifications at the same rate as a non-campus student. That's going to require, a lot of focus, a lot of coordination, a lot of curation. But, international experience tells us that that's certainly possible and feasible.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question around assessment. This one's more around that parity between the academic route, the university route, and this option. How do you manage it in terms of equivalency, as in fair and consistent, if delivering a qualification via both the apprenticeship route and the traditional route? Do we have any thoughts on that? Maybe an opportunity to talk about capstone assessments.
Sure, yeah. I mean, so it's a very common component of many qualifications already, where you'll have a large portfolio-based assessment at the conclusion of your program. Some of the models that we've worked through in terms of the implementation groups has been about actually collecting that evidence right the way through the course of your employment while you're enrolled in the program, so that you're building that progressively up and having that mapped to the assessments requirements of the program. It's certainly another layer of complexity for sure. But actually, a solvable problem. We have, as I say, very deep experience in these competency-based assessments and doing things in a way that involves some adaptation and responsiveness to the workplace. One of the interesting observations I heard just a couple of days ago, some really interesting research by Doug Nielsen at EIT about perhaps the opportunity to transform the Bachelor of Accounting into a degree apprenticeship. Yeah, the comment he made was that people do raise concerns about parity and quality of assessment, but what we're doing here is comparing potentially undergraduate students that might get through all 21 papers of the degree with C's, which is a fine, thing.
C's get degrees.
C's they do. But, for degree apprentices, they are turning up every day to a workplace where an employer is putting them in front of clients, expecting, top-notch performance right the way through their period of employment. And it's that evidence that's being used to demonstrate competency and achievement. And actually, I think does flip some of these models on their head about, where we think the quality lies. I don't know if Ty and Kieran, you have any thoughts?
No, I think I agree. I think it's an interesting challenge to think about. But as you say, what you might be doing in practice, I think this is the thing. There's still that learning alongside that. So there's still that academic rigour and applying that. And I think you're working 52 weeks a year plus minus your annual leave, etc. There's a lot of time packed in there versus somebody who's doing a degree over essentially a shorter period of time and in terms of hours spent. So it's swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
That contact time is very different.
Absolutely.
Both in terms of quality and quantity.
Exactly. So I think they're different. Same, different. And so we just need to consider them differently.
Yeah. We have a participant here who doesn't have a question, but is talking about their own personal experience and saying full-time work and part-time study was awesome for my family and my responsibilities, which I think is exactly what we're getting at here, isn't it?
Again,
yes.
That's another good, flexibility is key for some people.
Yeah, that real-life consideration,
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
The world's changing and
it
there's
is indeed.
Responsibilities, and if you may come with additional cultural responsibilities that others don't. And so it's a lot to juggle for anyone. And if you're doing this later on in life, then we want to enable those people into the industry. We don't want to limit them. So I think anything that we can do to do that is going to be good.
As we said at the start, this piece of work has been going for about 3 years now. And we know that Concove comes to an end at the end of this year. So what will happen to all this good work to ensure that there is continuity and hopefully a broader scale and adoption of this model moving forward?
Sure. So a couple of things. I sort of hope that with this webinar, with all the resources that are being published today, I would hope that gives providers, employers some confidence to take this work forward. We've committed to continuing community of practice. That is an opportunity for provider and other interested parties to come together to hear about emerging practice and research, and certainly folks are interested in joining that community to reach out. And beyond that, we've handed over the work to the provider and employer industry association partners to take forward. So we have plans for those degree apprenticeship programs to begin accepting enrolments next year in many cases, and really, becomes a business as usual process. But I think just stepping back from that, what's struck me is actually the ability to have some body or some people involved in that convening function and coordinating across the those networks has been really powerful and kind of initiating the work and sustaining it and keeping the momentum going. So we are talking to partners about how we could sustain that work, and obviously keen to talk to anybody who's got an interest in being involved. We've discussed the possibility of activation workshops where we might use some of the resources and the guidelines to help employers, professional associations, and providers really get on the journey together. So we'd look forward to engaging on that.
Thank you. Stephen asks a great question here. Is there a potential for a pathway for a trade qualified person to move into an architectural degree apprenticeship with recognised prior learning and skills gained in on-job learning already? We're all nodding.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, that's a really exciting prospect to consider. I know within the architectural technology sector or the architectural design sector, there's a lot of builders, I've noticed, get to a point in their career where they, the tool belt comes off and they see the comfy computer chair and want to just slump in. Yeah, certainly. I don't know if you want to touch on that, Brendan, or
I think many professional associations and industry bodies do have pathways for people that have developed experience on the job. So it may be that you're trade qualified and if, your roles have evolved in different ways and you've developed those competencies, and so you can have that recognised professional registration. There's a number of different. There's no fixed model for this kind of stuff, and when we look across the ditch to Australia, who already have a number of degree apprenticeship programs underway, and actually, strong commitment from federal and Commonwealth ministers to develop frameworks to support them. Some of the models they've got there are where you can concurrently obtain, in one case, your electrical trade qualification and an engineering degree in electrical engineering. So there are, innovative ways that we can approach this as well.
Both from an educational perspective and an employment perspective. And I think, opportunities like this, they provide more visibility of the pathways available that you don't think about when you're starting your career. But as you say, you get to a certain age and stage of life and you do perhaps want to come off the tools, but having that visibility of what options are available to you is actually quite difficult to navigate. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. This has been a really insightful discussion once again. We've heard today that degree apprenticeships are not just a concept, they're an emerging reality that can make higher education more connected, more inclusive and more productive. You can find our employer, learner and tertiary provider guides on the Concove website, and I believe there'll be a link in the chat available to you as well, along with broader details on our enabling framework. We'd also invite you to join our community of practice and stay connected and continue this conversation. I'd like to thank Brendan, Karen and Ty, not only for your time today, but for all of your time over the past 3 years working on this project. As Concove, I'm very grateful for your involvement in this piece of work. Thanks for sharing your insights today. Thanks to everyone who joined us online. Thank you for the questions. We really appreciate your time and enjoy the rest of your day.